Guess who's coming to the Calling All Growers webinar? That's right, the star of Growin' Belushi, Jim Belushi.
How many plants?
200 plants in here. So this is our famous Captain Jack strain.
It will be Pro Cannabis Media's growing professor, Liz Grow, guiding her cast of growers from Humboldt County, California. Wendy Kornberg of Cannabis and James Buer of Organic Cultivators, along with Ben Morgan Dillon from Acadia Farms. It all gets started on February 23rd at 8 p.m., 2 weeks after the debut of Calling All Growers with Liz Grow. Sign up today at procannabismedia.com. Welcome again. Another live edition of Green Rush Live, our regular Friday afternoon talk show on the business of cannabis or the cannabis business, depending on which way you want those words to be distributed or seen. I'm Jimmy Young, the founder of Pro Cannabis Media. So happy to bring in an old guest host, a regular on this show, David Rabinovitz. Welcome back to Green Rush Live.
Thanks, Jimmy. It's good to be back with you.
And you know, every third Friday of every month, we are welcomed by Morgan Fox, now with the National Organization of Reform of Marijuana Laws. There is, oh, look at Morgan. He's got some of this. He's got some stuff going on here.
I'm getting old, Jimmy. Give me a break.
Yeah, that's right. Real old.
Yeah, you don't know old like David and I know old. Okay, let's just say. But good to see you, Morgan. Thank you so much. We always look forward to your reports and your insight on what's going on in the world of cannabis reform at the federal level. And I just want to make sure everybody understands that this show, after Morgan is gone, will be dedicated to Black History Month. And we will be talking with a lot of African-American entrepreneurs in the cannabis space. We're looking forward to that. But right now, we're looking forward to Morgan Fox's report. Give us some insight. Tell me some good news that Senator Schumer and his comrades are ready to get it onto the Senate floor.
Well, I mean, we've seen reports over the last couple of weeks, both publicly and privately, that Senator Schumer is working towards introduction of the Cannabis Administration and Opportunity Act in April. We don't know exactly when, but the fact that he is currently shopping it around to members of the Senate in order to get their feedback on it before they officially introduce it, I think is a really good sign. There's probably going to be some last minute tweaking involved in it. Unfortunately, no one that I'm aware of outside of Senate offices has actually seen what the official language looks like. And, you know, there were hundreds, if not thousands, of comments submitted when the draft legislation was originally released back in July, including by NORML, by NCIA, by MCBA, by DPA, by like a slew of other groups. And so it'll be interesting to see exactly what from those comments made it into the introductory language. You know, we know that Senator Schumer, as well as Senators Booker and Wyden, have been very engaged with stakeholders in this process. So we're very hopeful that they took those comments seriously, and that you know, the bill that that does get officially introduced is an improvement on the draft legislation, which admittedly was already very thoughtful and a pretty decent bill. But there were some serious drawbacks to it that we hope get addressed. But really, at this point, it's just a game of wait and see. Luckily, I think that there will be an impetus for him to keep that timeline with the fact that it appears increasingly likely that the MORE Act is going to get a House floor vote on at some point in March. So, I mean, I think that that'll be really useful in terms of both like gauging support for cannabis policy reform, as well as keeping the Senate on a relatively short timeline in terms of getting that bill introduced. And then hopefully we can start getting hearings in the Senate about comprehensive as well as incremental cannabis policy reform bills, and just the issue in general, which to this point really hasn't happened. You know, there have been like a couple of small hearings here and there several years ago related to banking, but honestly, they were kind of hijacked by the opposition. So really hopeful that we're going to be able to foster a serious discussion about how to move forward with cannabis policy in this Congress as well as in future Congresses at some point in the next few months, and hopefully before people start hitting the campaign trail.
Morgan, how much of the timing do you think is influenced by the fact that Nancy Mace introduced her bill recently?
Well, it certainly added to the momentum. I'm not sure if that was a deciding factor on any of the timing. Senator Schumer has been eager to introduce this bill for a while, but sometimes it takes time to balance all of the various interests and to be able to get all the stakeholders involved, as well as the fact that there are a lot of other issues going on dominating Congress's time. So, I think that the Mace bill is, the State Reform Act is really important in that it shows that there's Republican support for this, but also that the floor for where these bills are is rising. We in the past, we've seen Republican-led bills that primarily focus on not even including descheduling, but just on providing a carve-out for states to be able to do what they want. And now we're looking at Nancy Mace's bill, and it not only includes descheduling, but also includes very low tax rates and expungement measures. These are things that we probably wouldn't have seen a couple of years ago. So I think this is indicative of the fact that the Overton window on this issue is shifting, and what we can ask for and what we can expect is moving farther and farther closer to actually what we want.
And let me ask that question about what do we really want? And here's the big question. A lot of people we talk to about this are not confident that the federal government can come up with a regulatory agency that focuses just on cannabis or works with the Alcohol Beverage Commission to oversee it. There's not a lot of confidence with any federal run organization. Is this the time to try and do that? Or can we go after just decriminalization and banking and hopefully some expungement somewhere?
Well, if we're talking about a comprehensive descheduling bill, I think it's absolutely vital that we include a federal regulatory structure at least. Because if we don't, then it's pretty much up for grabs for federal agencies, and it could end up being something that nobody wants. So if we actually include it in the legislation, I think that will at least provide us with a path forward. But conversely, I think that it's also important that any sort of federal regulations give a lot of leeway and credence to the states that have been pioneers in this issue. Clearly there is a need for some sort of overarching federal structure. How intrusive that is with what states are doing, I think is up for debate. There are certainly some issues where the federal government will probably need to step in and others where it won't. But overall, we're going to need to have some sort of a structure, and including it in the legislation that actually deschedules cannabis avoids a ton of problems. Regulation.
Well, we certainly welcome that. You mentioned that the MORE Act might be getting back onto the House floor. Wasn't Kamala Harris involved with that?
Vice President Harris, when she was a senator, was the lead sponsor of the MORE Act in the Senate.
Right.
Now
Who is?
The Senate game is entirely CAOA, or the expectation of it.
Got it. And if the MORE Act does get introduced in the House and happens to pass, does that put more pressure on the Senate, or does it have them dig their heels in even more?
I think it absolutely helps build momentum for it in the Senate. Just to clarify, the MORE Act of 2021 absolutely has been introduced in the current Congress and currently has 106 official co-sponsors. And I just learned today we're getting 2 more. So we're getting closer and closer to beating the 120 co-sponsor mark that we had last time when this was successfully voted upon in December of 2020. But I think that if nothing else, passage of this bill shows solid support for ending cannabis prohibition in the House and helps speed along the timeline in the Senate and raise the priority level of the issue. Not to mention that it allows a I guess, a room for debate to talk about which portions of which bill do we want to include in something that is going to be a bicameral legislation that eventually passes. You know, will something like that pass this year? I'm fairly doubtful, but anything's possible. But also, I think that it keeps the momentum alive and keeps the conversation alive in a way that allows us to start looking at, you know, alternatives to passing, or basically alternatives to not having anything passed this year, where we can start talking about beefing up the Safe Banking Act to include more social equity protections and more protections against predatory lending and discriminatory banking practices. It allows for more conversations about introduction in the Senate of the HOPE Act and possibly pairing that with the Safe Banking Act. Basically, it just makes the conversation much more front of mind, and also reminds voters that this is an issue that is probably closer to being addressed than almost any other social or political or criminal justice issue that is out there. And if either Democrats or Republicans or both are interested in actually doing anything for the American people, this is low-hanging fruit.
Right. That seems to be a term that you lobbyists tend to use. Your former comrade, Michael Correa, used to say that about the Safe Banking Act. And of course, it did pass 6 times, but it certainly hasn't gone anywhere in the Senate. Let me ask you, is there a normal tote board? You know, so every time you get another senator, you know, you like chalk it up, there's like another X, and, you know, you're trying to get to a majority, obviously, of co-sponsors. But let me ask a question about government more than anything else. If you aren't a co-sponsor on a bill, does that mean that you're still iffy on it? And are those the targets for your discussions more than anything else?
No, there are plenty of people that voted in favor of the MORE Act in 2020 that were not co-sponsors of it at that time, and that currently aren't co-sponsors of it. We're hoping to change their minds to add additional support. You know, I think that it's very important for lawmakers as well as their constituents to see who else is supporting these bills and who is 100% going to vote for it, absent any sort of changes or amendments. But that's sort of signaling that this is something I'm behind, and I'm going to back this bill and do what I can to help support it behind the scenes, I think is very important. And so we're urging as many people as we possibly can on both sides of the aisle to co-sponsor the MORE Act right now, because that's a very important signal to send in terms of what their priorities are for passing comprehensive cannabis policy reform legislation and descheduling.
Right. David, you got some?
You let me go into like sleep mode back here, Jimmy, but okay.
Oh, thanks. I appreciate the fact that we're putting you to sleep already.
Yeah. So there's been a lot of talk with editorials that have been published lately about trying to suspend the dormant commerce clause. Are you aware of those conversations going on?
I am. NORML doesn't really take a position on interstate commerce. You know, in theory and hypothetically, we definitely support interstate commerce, but we don't really have a solid position on what that looks like or how it should be implemented. There are a lot of valid arguments on several sides of the issue between allowing it to immediately start unfettered as soon as cannabis is descheduled, limiting it or putting sunset clauses in place that would only allow social equity applicants to be able to engage in interstate commerce. There are some models right now being suggested that would, for a time being, and even before descheduling, allow individual states to enter into interstate commerce compacts that would just be limited within those states and would be able to be designed by those states to best protect consumers and their industries and social justice. There are a lot of opinions about this, a lot of discussion about this. In general, NORML isn't in the business of trying to pick kingmakers. We're trying to look out for what's best for the consumer. But you know, in general, at some point, this is going to have to be treated like any other agricultural or commercial product, and to that end, interstate commerce is naturally going to come with that. So, you know, I think that it's wise to be prepared for that. But in terms of exactly how that looks and how it's rolled out, we're really kind of taking a step back on it.
My view of that is that interstate commerce is going to help the little guy a lot more than the big guy. And as much as I've read the articles and the positions that interstate commerce, the big guys will just take over. I think the MSOs are the ones who are going to get crushed with interstate commerce. I would probably, if interstate commerce came into play tomorrow, I would short IIPR stock. I think the interstate commerce is going to allow plant from really inexpensive grow areas like the West Coast to come to the East Coast, and indoor grow operations that are primarily MSO driven won't be able to compete with that kind of a pricing. I think it's a little guy who's going to do much better.
And I'm gonna add on to the interstate commerce thing, Morgan. It happens all the time. Now it's not legal, okay? And now you're starting to see in the legal market recipes for various edibles or tinctures being shared and licensed from one state to the other. They all make it in a legal state. It's a loophole, but it exists already.
Well, I can't really speak to that. I will say that the same problems that the lack of interstate commerce has created for existing MSOs are also going to negatively affect entrepreneurs from marginalized communities that are also seeking to be MSOs. I think that there is a really solid argument in favor of allowing interstate commerce and trying to normalize the cannabis trade nationwide. That being said, there are a lot of arguments in place that are out there right now that I find fairly compelling in terms of who is best positioned to engage in interstate commerce. Additionally, we're looking at the potential for completely wiping out the cultivation and processing, or at least the cultivation industries in states that are not as well positioned,
the Northeast,
technologically to be able to do that. So that's something to consider as well, particularly if any of those areas happen to have successful social equity programs, which admittedly none of those are. As I'm sure that you guys saw from MCBA's report last week. But interstate commerce is going to be disruptive in a number of ways. So I think that it's absolutely vital that we look at it carefully. But again, I'm not in a position to say exactly what it should look like. I think that there are pros and cons on in every model that you look at.
It's estimated 10% of the commercial electricity consumption in Massachusetts is now being consumed by marijuana grow operations.
And from an environmental standpoint, I think that that's a very important aspect to look at.
Right. They're not good for the environment. It makes no sense to grow a plant of that size that has basically such a small fruit indoors. The ratio of plant size to output doesn't make sense, and it just consumes a ton of electricity. I personally think interstate commerce will actually give social equity a leg up, because social equity entrepreneurs, many of them have contacts. I've talked to plenty of them, and they have contacts in other states, especially on the West Coast. They'll be the first ones on JetBlue to fly to the West Coast to start to bring product back at a much better price, and they won't be beholden to the larger industrial indoor grow operators. They'll have much better pricing. They'll be able to compete head on with the MSOs with minimal problem. And in new states, think of Connecticut, New Jersey, New York, where plant material is going to be very scarce in the early part of the equation. They'll be able to get plant material. That's going to be more product manufacturers. I don't see how it hurts social equity with interstate. I think it is the one thing that can level the playing field.
Well, up until very recently, the prevailing argument was that interstate commerce would be a net boon for social equity applicants and licensees in every state. But recently some arguments have surfaced that I think are fairly compelling and worth looking at, particularly from folks like Shalene Title at the Parabola Center. I recommend that people look at both sides of these arguments and come to their own conclusions.
Well, I tell you, we are going to be focusing on the role that race has played in cannabis history in the United States and where it stands right now. And we all know that the Last Prisoner Project is trying to get all those who have been convicted of possession crimes out of jail. They've targeted, I believe, a guy by the name of Kevin Allen now to free. And I believe he was in Louisiana serving a life sentence for a $20 cannabis deal to an undercover cop. And, when I read stuff like that, it obviously really, really bothers me. How do we undo? Are we doing enough to undo the wrongs of how the failed war on drugs has happened here, and how Black people are 3.5 more times liable to get arrested for possession crimes? Are we starting to see that at all? Because I read a report from Rutgers University this week that is showcasing again that even though New Jersey voted it legal, they still made an awful lot of arrests that had to do with race. And it bothers me that it's 2022. We've come so far, and these kinds of things are still happening.
I mean, in answer to your question, are we doing enough? Hell no, we aren't.
Good.
We can always do much, much more. Talking about arrest rates, I think it's important to point out that post legalization at the state level, a lot of times racial disparities in arrests persist for whatever violations are still on the books and able to be charged, particularly because some of the federal issues that are involved, particularly because of public consumption laws that are in place. But you do have to look at the fact that the overall number of arrests dropped significantly in these states. So we're talking about real people who are no longer being arrested. The disparities still exist, and those are problems that are systemic in policing, not just in cannabis issues.
And in the NFL too. I'm going to throw that in there, okay, because of what happened with Brian Flores. Okay, we know that racism exists in this country. Sometimes it's as blatant as it is with the example of the NFL, and sometimes it's an example of arrest records of Black people versus white people, even though both races use it the same percentage.
I mean, and I think it goes beyond just the negative justice issues. Clearly, just stopping arrests or decreasing arrests is not enough. It's definitely a huge step in the right direction, but we need to start looking at or continue to look at things like repairing the harms caused by prohibition, by helping the communities that have been most impacted by prohibition build generational wealth and get access to new opportunities that have been denied to them, by providing for record clearance and expungement and resentencing. And I mean, you guys know that I got into this because of firsthand witnessing sentencing disparities. So, I mean, these are things that we have to address, not just decreasing the number of arrests. However, at the same time, does the guy that's about to do 5 years in Angola for a joint really give a crap if there's a community center built in his neighborhood off of cannabis tax revenue? So we really have to balance these things between, the fact that we clearly have to move more from a negative justice to a positive justice paradigm when we're looking at cannabis policy reform. And, a lot of times that will take a while. That will take longer than if it would just be, simple decriminalization or depenalization or removing the possibility of arrest. But we do need to pursue that and pursue reparative justice when it comes to the drug war and particularly cannabis prohibition. But as long as we're doing that, we do need to be honest with ourselves that the delays that come with being able to get those gains that help everybody and help the historical injustices that have occurred because of prohibition sometimes result in more people getting arrested. And these are real people who are dealing with the real collateral consequences of that. So, I think it's something that we have to think about and be honest about, not necessarily to eschew those decisions, but it's necessary to be honest with ourselves about it because there are consequences to our actions when it comes to advocacy, whichever way you go.
Right. Absolutely. Hey, always a good discussion with you, Morgan Fox. We talk about a lot of different issues. You got opinions on a lot of them, and you give us some insight on really what goes on. in the trenches in the federal government, and we have a lot of respect for those who are fighting for this policy change, like yourself. So again, third Friday of every month is always going to be reserved for you. You'll always have a place here. And I thank you for coming on.
Thanks for having me, guys. Always a pleasure.
All right, there goes Morgan Fox,
Thanks,
now
Morgan.
NORML. And we're going to take our 4:20 break, listen to Jonathan Edwards. When we come back, we will continue our discussion about that racial disparity in our country when it comes to cannabis, and also some success stories about people who have entered into the business and are viable and successful. So don't go away. Green Rush Live continues after this.